Hello, everybody. Nice to see so many of you here and online. Hello, everybody. So this session is on leading the Dharma life. And when Bhante asked me if I'd like to give a talk in this session on leading the Dharma life, my first thought was, well, that would be interesting. I've absolutely no idea what the Dharma life is. What occurs to me is an aphorism by the painter Cecil Collins. And he said, it's necessary to create in order to understand, not understand in order to create. It has to be that way around. So what he meant was, if you know in advance what a painting or a poem is going to be, well, you never actually do it. There's absolutely no point. There has to be a reaching beyond your present understanding involved. There has to be some kind of surprise. And the same is true of the spiritual life, the Dharma life. It's something that has to be lived. And you can't really understand it. If we can understand it at all, except in retrospect. So I've called my talk, The Dharma Life is Never What You Think It Is. It's always a going beyond ourselves, a going beyond the idea we have of ourselves, an idea of the spiritual life. It means living our life, whatever's occurring, whatever's going on, and working with it in accordance with the Buddha's Dharma, with the Buddha's teaching. And it doesn't mean doing anything in particular. It doesn't mean you have to sit here and give a talk, whatever. I'll say a bit more about this a bit later. It just means being yourself. Being yourself at ever deeper and ever higher levels. It means becoming more authentic. We each have to live our own lives and nobody else's. And grand as it may sound, the Dharma life that we live will be unique and unprecedented. So no two Dharma lives are the same. So my talk's something of a journey of discovery. What interests me at the moment is not the details of my everyday existence, but rather some kind of underlying principle, underlying dynamic that has informed my approach. So over the years, I've had a number of different lifestyles. I've lived for many years in men's communities. I've lived with friends, I've lived on my own. I had about 8 years mostly on solitary retreats in 3 or 4 month blocks. And I found myself driving a forklift truck, invoicing customers in a warehouse selling Whole Foods, and working in a West Indian community centre in northwest London. So I'm now loosely based, as about an hour was saying, now loosely based a few miles from here in Church Stratton, in a wee sheltered flat with communal facilities, communal meetings, communal get-togethers, COVID permitting. And all of this has been living the Dharma life, as far as I'm concerned. But what exactly is the Dharma life? Well, as it happens, at the same time that Bhante asked me if I'd like to give a talk, a friend sent me a poem. It's by a poet I'd never heard of. And I read the poem, I thought, blimey, that's the Dharma life. whether overtly or by accident, I didn't know, but something in it resonated with my own life. It's a bit like, would you know when someone's ready for ordination? It's like you're going for refuge, they're going for refuge, resonates with you're going for refuge. It's not a matter of bureaucratic ticking of boxes. It's more like appreciating a work of art. So I thought I'd read the poem that my friend sent me. It's by an Estonian poet called Jan Kapinski, and it's called "The Washing Never Gets Done." And I think, as far as I know, it's his own translation. So the washing never gets done. The washing never gets done. The furnace never gets heated. Books never get read. Life is never completed. Life is like a ball which one must continually catch so it won't fall. When the fence is repaired at one end, it collapses on the other. The roof leaks. The kitchen door won't close. There are cracks in the foundation. The tall knees of children's pants. One can't keep everything in mind. The wonder is that beside all this, one can notice the spring, which is so full of everything, continuing in all directions, into the evening clouds, into the redwing's song, and into every drop of dew on every blade of grass in the meadow, as far as the eye can see, into the dusk. So when I first came across the FWBO, as it was then, in Manchester, I was living with my girlfriend and working in a large night shelter for the homeless. So there'd be about 300 men and a handful of women there each night. And the place was derelict. It was a derelict old school building, tucked away out of sight, tucked away out of consciousness. So to call something Dickensian is something of a cliche, but Dickensian it certainly was. Most of the guys were sleeping or attempting to sleep in grotty, bashed up old armchairs that were only fit for the skip. And there were all kinds of people there. When there's a housing shortage, the most vulnerable, for whatever reason, end up on the streets. I found it difficult to believe that such places still existed. And at the same time, I found myself identifying in some way with the people there. I knew instinctively what it was about. It was about survival in a world that was relentlessly hostile. And thinking back, my own early life was extremely violent and without protection. And I felt for the people there. And life also goes on a symbolic level. And I was unaware at the time there was something deeply homeless in my own nature. Since become expressed in being in an anagarika, one of these gold cases. So anagarika literally means cityless, or even uncivilized. So as well as working in the night shelter, I became politically involved as well. I joined a campaign group, a political pressure group. We tried to get the city council to do something. And to their great credit, they did. They eventually did. And we were able to close down the night shelter. On a personal level, those years took their toll. By the time I kind of stumbled across the movement, I was completely burnt out and exhausted. So what's perhaps characterized my life more than anything has been a sense of bafflement. As a child, I remember being completely baffled. And what baffled me most about life was that other people didn't seem to be at all baffled. Everybody else seemed to know exactly what we were doing. My parents made a big thing seemed to make a big thing of doing well at school. So that, okay, let's try and do well at school. Maybe that'll be the way forward or the way out or whatever, the way in. Yeah. So I did well at school. I ended up going to university, ended up with a degree, but I still didn't know anything. It's like I left university empty-handed. It's like none of the answers that I've been seeking were to be found there. It's just like a complete dead end. But when I eventually found the FWBO, I wanted to learn how to meditate. That's what brought me along. But it wasn't really meditation that kept me involved, that kept me coming along. I found meditation absolutely excruciating. I used to grit my teeth and will the bell to ring so that it would be over as soon as possible. And it wasn't really, I couldn't really say it's the people that drew me either. There'd be like half a dozen of us, or even less, at the regulars class then in Manchester. It's a very, very small situation. And none of the people were the sort of people that I'd normally hang out with. And I don't think I was the sort of person they'd normally hang out with either. And it wasn't really the Dharma that drew me. I couldn't really claim it's a Dharma drew me. Most of what was said kind of washed over me in a kind of haze of incomprehension. But then one evening I did my first puja. And in the middle of the puja was the Heart Sutra. Form is only emptiness, and emptiness only form. The Heart Sutra. And I thought, that's it. That's what I've been after. That's what I've been after. I had no idea what it meant. I hadn't got a clue what it meant. But I somehow realized that wherever it came from, somebody actually knew something. Somebody actually knew what I was after. Somebody knew something. Something resonated in it. Something resonated in the core of my own being. And I knew I'd found home. I knew where home was. And I knew it was, might not have found home, but I knew kind of that there was a home. So, form is only emptiness, emptiness only form. So I've not got the time, it's not the time to go into the Heart Sutra in any great detail. And in any case, to do so might give a false impression, might be misleading, as if you have to be kind of clever, philosophically minded or something to make something of it, to make use of it. Nothing could actually be further from the truth. The Zen tradition tells us of the Buddha holding up a flower. It's essentially making the same point. It's not something intellectual. The point isn't intellectual. It's like kind of using words to get beyond words. But by emptiness is meant empty of any inherent existence. So all the forms we see, all the shapes, all the colours are empty of any inherent existence. Everything is empty. Even the concept of emptiness, shunyata, is itself empty. And one thing this means, or one of the obvious things this means, is that our whole habit of acquisition is thoroughly deluded. Because ultimately there's nothing substantial to grasp hold of, nor is there anybody substantial to grasp hold of it. The whole way we grasp at things, grasp at life, as though it's outside of ourselves, is in the end futile. This may seem to be nihilistic, but then we have the other side of the coin. Emptiness is only form. So there's not some kind of separate transcendental realm existing somewhere else. It's not that life's some kind of empty hole of non-existence. It means there's no opposition between form on the one hand, all the shapes and colours that we see on the one hand, and emptiness on the other, the fact there's no inherent existence on the other. The two are not separate, they're not a duality. So not seeing this, we go for the form and ignore the emptiness. So we seek security and satisfaction in material objects, in consumer products, forever falling apart, forever letting us down. We enter relationships as if they could last forever, exactly as they are, and fulfill all our needs. We seek status, wealth, reputation, and all the rest of it. Our lives become a whirlwind, what we call the 8 worldly concerns. We're seeking pleasure. We seek pleasure, avoid pain. We seek gain, avoiding loss. Seek praise, avoiding blame. Seek renown, avoiding disgrace. We think if we only get the one, if we can get the one, only get the one and get rid of the other, not have the other, we'll be happy and at peace. The Heart Sutra tells us that satisfaction and contentment can never be released, can never be reached in this way, because everything is empty. Nothing has any intrinsic reality. Not seeing this, we are faced with a life that is continually unsatisfactory. However much we get, however much we acquire, however much we try and get things to go our way, get what we want, the sense of unsatisfactoriness is never resolved. So there's no inherent existence even in our consciousness. So you might be sitting here and you might be looking at Vidyaraja, or you might be looking at the shrine. It's like a moment of consciousness. One moment of consciousness you're looking at me, one moment of consciousness you're looking at the shrine, maybe you're looking at your watch, that's another moment of consciousness. Moment of eye consciousness, as we say technically, EYE, eye consciousness. And the same for all the senses. Somebody might come and light a stick of incense, and then we have a moment of nose consciousness. So then what we do then, we create a narrative that links it all together. We say, I am sitting here, I am looking at the shrine, I am looking at Vidyaraja, I am looking at a watch, I am smelling incense. I am the person doing all this, and I am quite separate from all this. There's me separate from all this. But this narrative is purely an artificial creation. It's something we've constructed in our minds, something we've added on to our experience. This kind of narrative self, simply doesn't exist in any kind of real way, any kind of real sense. And having constructed this false narrative self, we're then prone to all kinds of hopes and fears. We somehow identify with this narrative voice as who we really are. We think, this is me, I. So we live in a world of perpetual anxiety and fear that arises from that. Unless we meditate, expand our awareness, it's actually very difficult to see that this is actually what's going on. We don't live in the world as it is, but in an artificial one of our own creation. We apprehend dualistically what is fundamentally non-dual in nature. So what this means began to come home to me when I asked Bhante, when I asked Vidyaraja for ordination. In those days, there was no ordination process. You asked when you thought you were ready. So the next time I went to Padmaloka, where Vidyaraja was living, next time I went on a men's event there, as a man called, I made an appointment to see him. So after lunch at the appointed time, climbed the stairs up to his study. And when I got there, the door was half open. And I could hear an older member called David Mitra. I could hear David Mitra talking to Bhante inside in the study. And after a few moments, I could hear Bhante say, "Is there anybody waiting for me outside?" And David Mitra's head popped round the door and reported back. And I could hear Bhante saying, "Would you show him in, please?" So David Mitra just left the room and motioned, didn't say anything, he just motioned in with his hand. So I walked into Bhante's study. He was sitting in an armchair at the other end of the room. And I expected him to say something like, "Hello," or "How are you? Won't you sit down?" But he didn't. He just sat there. And he had a sort of uncanny, puzzled expression on his face. It's a bit like looking in a mirror, expecting to see yourself and finding there's no one there. It's that kind of strange situation. So I thought, what do I do now? I thought, well, if I plonk myself down in front of him, that might be a bit rude. So I said, I'll sit here, Bhante. And I went and sat down by the side of him. And I said, I'll come straight to the point. I've come to ask you for ordination. And then with a big smile and tremendous warmth, he said, "Yes, I thought you had." So we talked for some time in Bhante's study. There was a summer thunderstorm, with a thunderstorm going on outside. And he apologised. He said, "Well, I'm very sorry, but the ordination retreat's full this year. So you'll have to wait." So then he explained what he does when people ask for ordination. He talks to people, he consults people in the local chapter of order members as to what they think of my readiness for ordination. And one thing he asked me was who I knew in the order. And I mentioned a few names, and I sort of added, they all seem very different, they're all very different kinds of people. And he said, yes, that it just goes to show you, you don't have to be any particular kind of person to be ordained. You don't have to be any particular kind of person to go for refuge. And he had it's a way of saying things that kind of goes in. Sort of a definite way of saying things. It's like it goes right in. You don't have to be anybody. Well, I was going to say, you don't have to be anybody in particular. You don't have to be anything in particular. You don't have to be any kind of person, one thing or another, at all in particular. One thing I said to him was I didn't know how I was going to express my commitment. And he just butted that right out. He said, just go for refuge. He said, and everything else will follow. Don't worry about it. So after talking for some time in this kind of way, the meeting seemed to be drawing to a conclusion. So I got up to leave. And then I suddenly had this feeling, I wanted to give him a hug. And so he was like sat in this armchair, sort of down below me, and I was kind of stood over him. And I suddenly thought, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. The whole thing struck me. Suddenly the whole thing struck me as ridiculous. He knew as soon as I walked in, as soon as he saw me, he knew that I'd come to ask for ordination. And I knew perfectly well what he does when people ask him for ordination. I knew perfectly well he consults the local chapter ordinance and all the rest of it. And yet we had to have this kind of formal conversation, as if neither of us knew this. This kind of ritual that had to be gone through. It just sort of suddenly struck me as being just quite funny, just quite ridiculous. And at that point, this rather puzzled expression suddenly seemed to return on Bhante's face. And then he suddenly got very animated, he suddenly got very excited, as if he'd suddenly seen something. And he suddenly started saying how pleased he was I'd asked for ordination, and how he's looking forward to seeing me again. And I was just trying to get out of the room. I thought, well, that's it. I've asked for ordination. I just wanted to get out of the room. And I couldn't get out the door. He kept going on about how pleased he was and how good it was to see me. So what I'd like to try and do is unpack that experience a little bit. As usual, I was baffled. First thing that comes to mind is that Bhante's study was upstairs at Padmaloka. Padmaloka means the realm of the lotus realm. So we may have dreams. We may have dreams about houses and buildings and so on. And usually, if we have dreams of houses and buildings, usually the ground floor relates to our conscious everyday experience in some way. And if we dream of upstairs, then that usually refers to sort of higher parts of our mind, a higher self. It's where the gods live, upstairs. And if we dream of a basement, that's usually a sort of lower unconscious part of ourselves, something that we've kind of ignored or pushed aside, maybe. So if we dream of an attic, say, that we never visit, then that says something about that probably says something about our relationship to our higher self, if you put it like that, higher mind. And if we dream of going into the basement, it's usually to be something we've kind of pushed aside or ignored. We're going to put down to meet it, something you've rejected, perhaps in some way. So Bhante was upstairs talking to David Mitra. David Mitra's name, interestingly enough, means friend of the gods. So I took off my shoes downstairs. That's a symbolic act in itself, and climbed the stairs to enter the realm of the gods. Didn't feel like a god at all, but that's what I had to do to ask for ordination. So I was ushered into Bhante's presence by a friend of the gods. So what did I find there? Well, Bhante, of course, was simply being himself. He was resting in emptiness. He was resting in shunyata. He wasn't at all distracted from his true nature, we might say. So what I saw was a reflection of my own puzzlement and confusion. It was just like a mirror back to me, just like looking in a mirror. And he knew as soon as I appeared that I'd come to ask for ordination. So by not saying anything, he gave me the space to ask, for me to ask in my own way, in my own time, without kind of directing me in any way. It was a supremely generous act, in fact. And I couldn't play follow the leader. I had to kind of step out any kind of assumptions I had, any kind of assumptions about myself, and simply be who I was, even kind of announce who I was, in a sense. And on that basis, we were then communicating. On that basis, we were able to communicate. We communicated as two individuals in our own right. So that's what Bhante set up. It's a genius. So then when the meeting was almost over, I found myself sort of laughing inside at the absurdity of the whole situation. I wasn't kind of laughing out of any kind of cynicism, but simply at the ridiculousness of the whole thing. The whole thing just struck me as ridiculous. And it struck me as ridiculous because the real communication that had taken place between us had actually taken place on an entirely different level, as if it were outside the meeting altogether. And this relates to what Sangharakshita refers to as the greater mandala of ascetic appreciation. It was that, I believe, that had excited him. So what is the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation? What is a mandala? Well, Sangharakshita quotes a Tibetan source as saying to make a mandala is to take a prominent aspect of reality and to surround it with beauty. So we decorate something. When we decorate something, it's because we hold that to be precious in some way. So, like on the shrine here, we take what's most precious to us, the enlightened mind, the enlightened heart, in the form of the Buddha, and we surround it with flowers and so on to decorate it, to make it beautiful. So we take what's most precious to us and we place it at the center of our lives and transform the rest of our lives in accordance with it. So here's a representation of what I mean. You can see that there, will be online. There's one on the shrine here as well. So at the center here we have a representation of Buddha, the ideal of enlightenment, a representation of our true selves, our true nature. And around the Buddha we have the five Buddha mandala, there's a pattern there that represents five jhanas, the five Buddhas. We explored towards the end of last year the five principal aspects of the enlightened mind. So we've got the Buddha in the middle and then the five principal aspects of the enlightened mind surrounding him. Again. And then we have a ring of lotuses, a ring of lotus petals. The lotus petals of purity that open around us, surrounding us, lotus petals of purity. And then we have around that we have the Vajra wall of determination. And then surrounding that are the flames that transmute samsara into nirvana. Flames arising that transmute samsara into nirvana. And these are the kind of rainbow coloured here. They're the colours of the five jhanas, five Buddhas. So the shape of the mandala gives a sense of wholeness and completeness, a sense of harmony. At the same time, it's dynamic. Our lives are moving forward towards wholeness and a sense of completion. So Sangharakshita has this to say about it. He says, you must think of yourself as living within the mandala. You must think of yourself as living within the mandala. And all your worldly life, your practical life, your utilitarian life, as occupying just a tiny corner somewhere in the mandala. Not think of the mandala as a little circle 1 foot in diameter within this great big utilitarian world. The real values are ascetic values, not practical values. The real values are ascetic values, not practical values. So what he's saying is we place our lives in the mandala, not the mandala in our lives. So that the real values are aesthetic and not practical. It was made very forcefully by the English visionary William Blake in a letter to a certain Reverend Dr. Trussler. And the Reverend Dr. Trussler didn't like Blake's work. And Blake wrote him a long letter in response. And one of the things Blake had to say was this. He said, I feel that a man may be happy in this world, and I know this world is a world of imagination and vision. I see everything I paint in this world, but everybody does not see alike. To the eyes of a miser, a guinea is more beautiful than the sun, and a bag worn with the use of money has more beautiful proportions than a vine filled with grapes. The tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing that stands in the way. Some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and by these I shall not regulate my proportions. And some scarce see nature at all, but to the eyes of a man of imagination, Nature is imagination itself. As a man is, so he sees. As a man is, so he sees. So Sangharakshita goes on, this gives rise to another attitude, that you don't really have anything to do. Well, do you? Most of the time, you're just sitting back, as it were, enjoying the universe. That's your major preoccupation. That's your real work, not to work. Just a small part of your time is devoted to the fulfillment of your very few simple, practical needs. And the rest of your time and energy you just devote to contemplating the universe, simply enjoying it all. This is how you live. You just appreciate everything aesthetically without thinking of using it. So that is how the Bodhisattva looks at it. Even when he's actively functioning, doing certain things that objectively need to be done, it is within this context of the much wider outlook, the much wider perspective of simply enjoying things, simply contemplating things aesthetically. So this is what the Heart Sutra is pointing to. The Bodhisattva of Compassion, Avalokiteshvara, when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all five skandhas, all the constituents of conditioned existence. He sundered the bonds that caused him suffering. So this is the ideal we can work towards. To quote Bhante again, the Bodhisattva appreciates things. He has an aesthetic appreciation of them. He's not interested in using them in any particular way or for any particular purpose. He's got no ego, as it were. There's no desire, there's no craving. So there's no subject, so there's no object. And he goes on to underline some of the implications for us. Why was this evolutionary process going on for millions upon millions of years? Just so that you could be there and do nothing. You're the result, you're the goal. You don't have to justify your existence by doing things which are useful. You yourself are the justification. The fact that you sit there, dance there, doing nothing, being completely useless. All you can really be said to exist for the sake of, is for some higher form of human life itself. You weren't brought into this existence after all these millions of years of evolution just to sit down at a typewriter or to keep accounts or to go and give a lecture. You are the justification of that whole process. You are an end in yourself, barring, of course, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that you can develop into. Don't be ashamed of just sitting around and doing nothing. Glory in it. Do things spontaneously, out of a state of inner satisfaction and achievement. To be able to do this, we need to be free of guilt. How can you be spontaneous if you're riddled with guilt? That's how people get at you. They work on your feelings of guilt. You shouldn't allow them to do that. It's emotional blackmail. Look how hard I'm working. Don't you feel bad just sitting around doing nothing? letting me do it all, you should say, no, I feel fine. I'm enjoying seeing you do it. So I should maybe point out, he's not advocating being lazy, but doing things from, what he's advocating is doing things from a positive basis, from a basis of joy, from a basis that allows freedom and spontaneity. So that's entering the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation, the greater mandala of uselessness. So the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation might sound all very fine, but how do we do it? How do we enter the greater mandala? Well, we enter it through developing metta. Essentially, we enter it through developing metta. If we think about it, if we see somebody with hatred, well, they look ugly, don't they? They look really ugly. If we put more hate we could muster, they look really, really ugly. And conversely, if we see somebody with metta, if we see something with metta, it looks beautiful. They look beautiful. So when we see somebody with metta, we see it without self-interest. Beauty teases us out of self-preoccupation. So when we enter the mandala of aesthetic appreciation, everything appears beautiful. Our consciousness has expanded. The dark becomes sublime. We become spontaneous, free, and creative. We seem to have lots of energy. So I think with that, we're ready to return to Kaplinski and his poem. Our lives are concerned with any number of practical necessities, from feeding the dog to saving the planet. But if that's all there is, if that's all we have in our lives, it becomes oppressive. If that's all we have, then it's based on ignorance. As Kaplinski says, the washing never gets done. Life is like a ball which one must continually catch, so it won't fall. There's just no end of it. What we need to do is live this life, this practical life, within the greater mandala of ascetic appreciation. The wonder is that beside all this, one can notice the spring, which is so full of everything, continuing in all directions into the evening clouds, into the redwing's song, and into every drop of dew on every blade of grass in the meadow, as far as the eye can see, into the dusk. So I've got far to go. At the beginning of July, I had a week's retreat at Adasthana in Herefordshire. Some of you have probably been there. That's where Sangharakshita spent the last years of his life. And while I was there, I found myself quite spontaneously circumambulating his burial mound that's there in the grounds. And in doing so, I found myself circumambulating the conversations we'd had, silent exchanges we'd had over the years, the communication we'd had. And I also realised that what I was doing, and what I've always been doing, is circumambulating the core of my own being. In Buddhism, we call this core the no self. That causes no end of confusion. But it doesn't mean, as we know from the heart sutra, it doesn't mean that we don't exist. But that's our core self. It's a no self. It's not who we think we are. It's that core self that's continually trying to speak to us, continually trying to awaken us, continually trying to awaken us to our true nature, to who we are. So something is calling us to our own core, our own gestalt, one might say, our own wholeness, our own uniqueness as individuals, our own personal myth, we might say. And we may be prompted by dreams or by symbolic circumstances of our lives, or something somehow just percolates through. It's like our core self continually trying to, hello, I'm here, speak to us, communicate with us. We may also be drawn to a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva figure. Somehow speaks to us of our core nature, embodies in some way our core nature, our deepest values. And so we can place that figure at the centre of our mandala, the centre of our lives. It embodies our true selves, our highest potential. And as we circumambulate this core self, our consciousness expands. As we circumambulate this core self, our consciousness expands, it becomes bigger. Our consciousness becomes bigger. And it also expands upwards. We experience higher states of consciousness. And it also expands downwards. And we experience our depths. We integrate our depths. We transform all that darkness into light. And as we do so, as we integrate ourselves, we change. We become different people. We grow. We become bigger. We become you in some way. We continually become you. So the chief protagonist, we might say, of the Heart Sutra is Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of Compassion. So he's deep in meditation. He sees the emptiness of the five skandhas. He sees the emptiness of all conditioned existence, the constituents of conditioned existence. And in his best known form, he has 11 heads and 1,000 arms. So he sees in all directions. He has 1,000 different ways of helping us to grow and reach enlightenment. The more imagination we have, the greater feeling we have for life and the predicament of others. The more imagination we have, the more compassion we have too. So Avalokiteshvara is also a symbol of the order. We may not individually be able to be bodhisattvas, but if we link arms and work together for the benefit of all beings, we can collectively become one. What we can do on our own is very limited, but together we can manifest as a great being, a bodhisattva, and make a very real difference to the world. So, with that in mind, I'd like to end with another poem, one that appeared in the newsletter a few months ago, and it comes from Karen Jones, and it's called Resting in the Heart of Avalokiteshvara. We can say resting in emptiness is resting in the heart of Avalokiteshvara. So resting in the heart of Avalokiteshvara. Child of the Buddha, how can you not love yourself? When you feel lack, reconnect with that to which you aspire. Rest in my heart and feel it beating throughout the universe. See with my many eyes all who are lost and all who have found the way. Through my 1,000 arms, you may reach out to anywhere. Together, we can make a difference to this world. Will you choose to be a lost one or my hand today?